Welcome to Sideline Sanity with me, Michele Tafoya. Hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us every single day that we publish. Today, I want to do some second level thinking with you about climate change, about fossil fuels, about nuclear energy. Alex Epstein is really at the forefront of this movement of fossil fuels being a good thing. Now, look, I am as conscientious about clean air, clean water as anybody. I recycle like there's no tomorrow. However, I also understand the importance of fossil fuels in everything we do every day. The fact that we have refrigerators, the fact that we have air conditioning, the fact that we have heating. Because I live in Minnesota, heating is very important to me. And I know that this can't really be accomplished well without fossil fuels. So we need to think a little bit deeper. I hope you come into this with an open mind and listen to this guy. He's got 3 books out, and the most recent has garnered some interesting reviews. Slate wrote, and this is Slate, keep that in mind, "This new style of climate denial will make you wish the bad old days were back." That's Slate. Now we go to, this is Forbes, so a very, very different viewpoint. Alex Epstein's excellent and essential fossil future. So now you've got those 2 ends of the spectrum as far as reviews go. And then there's yet a third. And this book review comes from, I think this is on a gentleman on Substack. "In my recent courses on energy policy, I like to explain that discussions of energy technologies can be a lot like discussions of sport." And he goes on to say that Alex Epstein makes a good point, but also fails in many ways. So there are 3 really interesting reviews of this book coming from all different directions. Let's hear from the author himself, someone that Cori Bush, a congresswoman from St. Louis, Missouri, recently called a so-called expert who is a white supremacist. He is anything but, and I'll let him tell you himself. He is Alex Epstein. He's next.
For nearly 3 decades, she's reported the action from the sidelines. She started very young. She's covered the NBA, NFL, Olympics, and the college football and basketball national championships. And now, during these insane times in our world, Michele Tafoya thinks we need a serious dose of sanity. This is Sideline Sanity with your host, one of the sanest people on planet Earth, Michele Tafoya.
Alex, welcome. You know, I grew up in Southern California. My dad was an aeronautical engineer, and he was very much an environmentalist. You know, he used to bring home blueprints from his engineering lab, cut them up, and staple them to cardboard so we had pads of paper, which were the flip sides of the blue. He didn't want to go buy new paper. We were always using recycled paper. So I was raised in a very environmentally conscious environment, not to use that word too many times. So we all want to conserve and have clean energy and all the rest. But you are very much arguing in favor of fossil fuels. And I think when people first hear that, maybe they think, what do you mean? They're dirty. We got to get rid of them. We got to transition to clean. So can you, in a nutshell, summarize what it is about fossil fuels you are a fan of?
Yeah, and I think it's related to this issue of environment. And you sort of laughed because you used environment in different senses, but I actually think one of the keys to this whole issue is how you think of environment. And so I think of our environment from a human perspective, which doesn't mean that I don't care about the other things in our environment. I care about all of them, but I care about them from the perspective of how good is this world for what I would call human flourishing, for human beings to be able to live long, healthy, opportunity-filled, fulfilling lives. And so you think about, I think of everything in relation to that. Like, for example, I want to give him an unnaturally high chance of survival because it's part of me and my life, my fiance and that kind of thing. Whereas the malarial mosquito, I want to kill that most of the time. I want to eradicate it, certainly in my area. And the polar bear, I want it to exist because it's beautiful, but I want it to be cordoned off from me. And I think if this is very important because when people think of environment, they often think of it as something to save from human beings versus to improve for human beings. And I think of the world as a place to improve for human beings. And from that perspective, if you look at the world as a human environment, I think fossil fuels have been amazing for it and will continue to be amazing for the foreseeable future. And the main reason is that they help us overcome the basic problem of Earth as an environment, which is that it is a deficient and dangerous place. It's very low in usable resources. It's very high on natural threats. And so to overcome the deficiency and danger of nature, we need to be very, very productive. But we can only be productive with machines because those amplify and expand our productive abilities so we can be productive and prosperous. And we can only use machines to the extent we have what I call cost-effective energy. So energy that's affordable, reliable, versatile, able to power any type of machine, and scalable to billions of people in thousands of places. The more cost-effective energy is, the more people can use machines to become productive and prosperous on this very inhospitable planet. When energy becomes non-cost effective, which it is for billions of people today, in which it is increasingly becoming because of the opposition of fossil fuels, life is bad. So my basic argument is fossil fuels are a uniquely cost-effective source of energy in the present and for the foreseeable future. And actually, I think the world needs more of them. And even though they do have side effects, the benefits far, far outweigh any negative side effects.
Well, that's an interesting debate to get into. So what do you see as the most major side effects and the most fundamentally damaging side effects of fossil fuels?
So I have a very different view on this than the mainstream view. So we can take my view and the mainstream view, because the mainstream view is definitely that whatever happens with air and water and that kind of thing is trivial compared to climate. The idea that we're having a warming impact and that is going to cause all sorts of weather that we can't deal with, and that's going to overwhelm us. I mean, this is the thing the world is afraid of. This is why the world is against fossil fuels. I could talk about why I don't think that's the biggest thing. I think the biggest thing is air pollution in certain areas where you don't use modern filtration technology. So you have certain areas of China, for example, with very, very high levels of pollution. And a lot of that is because they don't respect individual rights. And part of respecting individual rights is having laws against pollution. But in terms of pollution, I think most of the world has realized we can cost effectively reduce it. It does not justify restricting fossil fuels significantly. What does in people's minds is the climate issue. So I'm happy to comment on that, because that's the thing people are really afraid of.
They are. And I was reading you're in a number of platforms. There are a number of ways to discover what Alex Epstein does, what he writes, what he thinks. And one of your arguments is about this 90% of scientists, or 97 rather, percent of scientists agree climate change is real and threatening and all the rest. To which you say what?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect encapsulation of how it's presented. So I'd say there are two problems with this claim. So one is when it says 97% of climate scientists agree, it's just talking about side effects of fossil fuels. So it says nothing about the benefits of fossil fuels. So it's 97% agree, therefore we should do this anti-fossil fuel policy. But to do an anti-fossil fuel policy, you need to look not just at negative side effects, but benefits. That's just a basic rule of thinking that's unfortunately violated. It's especially important because, as I show in my book, Fossil Future, what you have is the benefits of fossil fuels include the ability to make ourselves safe from climate, what I call climate mastery. So we actually have a dramatic decline in the rate of death from climate disasters like storms and floods. People don't know this, but you're 1/50th as likely to die from a climate disaster as you used to be. So it's crazy. You can't look at the side effects of fossil fuels without the benefits, because the benefits actually cure the side effects. And then if we look, the other problem with 97% is its account of the side effect is a total distortion, because what they're trying to get you to believe is, as you indicated, is something like, well, it's dangerous or it's catastrophic. But all the 97% studies show at most is that we have some impact, that we've caused some percentage of the 1 degree Celsius warming of the last 170 years, which has coincided with the greatest improvement in human life ever and the greatest decrease in climate danger ever. So even if we cause all of that warming, that is not catastrophe. So ignoring the benefits and what I call catastrophizing the side effects, that is the key to why people think so incorrectly about this issue. And our thought leaders are really culpable here.
One of those thought leaders, I suppose she's a thought leader. She's in Congress. Her name is Cori Bush, and she was one of the people on the House Congressional Subcommittee on Energy. She introduced you or talked of you in a way that I think is worth playing for our listeners, because I think it was disrespectful. It's a tactic I've seen used by many on the left, and that is to belittle people who are called in front of these committees. And I'm hoping John Berg, my producer, has it queued up. I want to play again. This is Cori Bush of Missouri, and she is referring to you in this way. Let's go ahead and roll that sound.
But my Republican colleagues have unironically invited for-profit think tank and oil titans whose expertise is in maximizing profits, especially at the expense of our Black, our brown, and our indigenous neighbors' health, safety, and well-being. One of these so-called energy experts is a philosopher who has previously espoused white supremacist views. For instance, in his 2000 college newspaper, he wrote, quote, "The African and American Studies Department has 23 classes. In many of these classes, African culture is presented not as inferior to Western culture, but as on equal footing with it. In other departments, the same is done with Latin American, Indian, and American Indian culture," end quote. When confronted about these views over 2 decades later, rather than disavow them, he doubled down on this narrative saying, quote, "It has nothing to do with skin color. I was arguing that those cultures overall are inferior to Western culture." We are not inferior to any culture, speaking as a descendant of one of those cultures. This is the witness the Republicans invited to discuss issues of energy security. He came here to promote fossil fuels, which we know are disproportionately harming and killing Black and brown people.
All right. First of all, I want to take issue with that last comment. Fossil fuels are disproportionately killing Black and brown people. This seems to be, again, a strategy, a tactic used by Democrats, really the left, I'll say, to portray as victims people of a different skin, people of any skin color that isn't white, as being disproportionately affected by something in society that, and she painted you as a white supremacist. So before we get into the attacks on you, what do you make of that statement that fossil fuels disproportionately affect people of color?
It's actually a perfect example of this general problem, what I call ignoring the benefits and catastrophizing the side effects. Because you look at the overall reality is that if you want to say Black and brown people are harmed by lack of fossil fuels, they're disproportionately harmed by lack of fossil fuels insofar as they live in the poorest areas of the world. So you look at, say, sub-Saharan Africa, it has very little energy used compared to the United States. And that is a direct cause of a low standard of living. You look at a place like India and, you can call, quote, brown people, and their life expectancy has skyrocketed thanks to the dramatic increase in the use of fossil fuels. I don't know what she would call Asian people, but you look at how much Asia has prospered. It's directly using fossil fuels. So it's really, the key is that people are deprived of the benefits of fossil fuels. Now, the plausibility of her argument is she says, she's basically ignoring the benefits and she's saying, well, look, things like air pollution, well, those will disproportionately affect certain communities. And there's a certain truth to that insofar as if you're poorer, all things being equal, you can afford to reduce pollution less. But the key is that the world needs more fossil fuels, including to be able to afford the cleanest ways of using them. So she just has it totally wrong, but this is a very conventional narrative that she's parroting.
Well, the other conventional thing that she's parroting happened in another hearing that was going on the same week as yours, and it was the hearing where Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger were presented as quote-unquote so-called journalists, both very high-achieving journalists for many, many years. You were just called a so-called philosopher and fossil fuels
so-called
expert.
Energy expert.
So-called energy expert.
An industry titan. That was my favorite. And I'm expert at maximizing profits, which I wish.
There we go. Well, and she accused you of these white supremacist viewpoints, which you just basically explained. But when you're hearing this, did you know that kind of attack was coming?
Yeah, it might be interesting for people to just put yourself in my shoes because I didn't know it was coming. And just imagine you've been preparing to testify in front of Congress, and we didn't even say the subject. This was about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and the Biden administration depleting it and why I was critical of that. So I was super prepared on that issue. I have the fortune of having a lot of experience being attacked, and I've been attacked specifically in this way because the Washington Post attempted a hit piece on me to basically cancel my book, which I was able to destroy their piece and to sell a ton of books actually and to really preempt it. But I'm sort of unusual in my ability to deal with these situations, even if I'm not expecting it. But it is a really horrific thing to do, to a witness, because if you are able to like make a witness appear to be a racist, I mean, that can destroy their whole career if they don't know how to address it. My colleague, or not my colleague, but another expert who was next to me, they tried to portray him as this industry shill, like, oh, you worked with the Koch brothers, you're evil. You know, like, this is one of the leading experts in oil trading, and he basically created the Koch brothers trading platform and is a revolutionary in the industry. And they just tried to totally dismiss him. So fortunately, I know how to deal with these things, and I had heard this accusation. And the basic thing is, as I pointed out, she refuted her own statement because she said, oh, he doubled down on this. And then he said it has nothing to do with skin color. I was arguing that certain cultures are overall inferior. And as I explained, my argument was and is that individualism and freedom, which is what I was focused on, and reason, those are better than non-individualism, non-freedom, and irrationality. And certain cultures have more individualism, freedom, and reason than others. And I specifically brought up the examples of female genital mutilation and slavery. And those are both, in my view, objectively inferior to non-female genital mutilation and non-slavery. And they don't have any answer to that. I mean, look, and also she's calling me a white supremacist. My background is Jewish. Does she think that white supremacists love Jews? And nobody is thinking about this at all. What they're just trying to do is avoid engaging my arguments, including my arguments on this issue, which if she listened to my arguments on skin color, it would actually help a lot, because what we need is more individualism and less thinking of people as part of these skin color collectives and more as individuals.
Right. It's again, it's a tactic that is widely used, and for me, I saw right through it as she said it to you, and I could see what she was trying to do. And I'm not saying that I think both sides are guilty of this to an extent, but this was just beyond the pale and disgusting, and all of it toward you and anyone else that was sitting there ready to testify with you. I just thought it was belittling. They were trying to make you look bad and probably trying to ruffle you before you testified, but clearly you weren't ruffled, and people can take an example in that. The aim of these people is to not engage, as you said, is to disparage you, belittle you, and demean you, and make you seem like you are so-called instead of what you actually are, which is an expert. We'll get into more of this. I want to talk nuclear energy with you and so much more. Alex Epstein, he's written 3 books, the most recent, Fossil Future, Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More Oil, Coal, and Natural Gas, not less. Back in a second. So when you're on camera for most of the day of your life, you have to worry about what your skin looks like. And so that's why I'm very particular about my skincare products. And I use Genucel. I'm going to spell that for you. Genucel. Remember that. Genucel.com/Michele to get 70% off. I'll tell you on what in a second. So I don't like to look tired. I like to look fresh and awake, and I kind of like to look younger than I am. That's what I try to do. So Genucel I use because it's an antioxidant-based skincare company. It's made right here in the United States, and it's formulated by a pharmacist with quality ingredients. Their products are, what they do is they smooth out the fine lines and they stop new ones from forming. So one of my favorites is the Deep Firming Serum. It's got stem cell technology. It's this little serum that you don't even have to use very much at all, which is nice. It lasts a long time. Dab it over your skin after your skin's been cleansed. And I use the Deep Sea Cleanser, which is soap free, which is amazing. So this combination of products just instantly makes your skin feel fresh and toned and plump. Right now, like I said, 70% off Genucel's most popular package, just in time for the warm spring weather. It features Genucel's Ultra Retinol that contains a powerful retinol alternative. It's safe on your skin in the summer sun because retinol can be tough. And Genucel's dark spot corrector to reduce the appearance of dark marks and sunspots from long summer days outside. Plus, you'll still get Genucel's classic under-eye bags therapy for those annoying under-eye bags and puffiness. And with its immediate effects, see results in as little as 12 hours guaranteed, or your money back. Can't beat that. Don't wait. Visit Genucel.com/Michele, Michele, Michele with 1 L. Save over 70% off their most popular package. Plus, on every order subscription, you get a luxury gift box with 2 free springtime essentials. That's 2 free gifts plus free concierge shipping for a limited time. Go to Genucel.com/Michele, Genucel.com/Michele. Michele with one L. So, Alex, you're also the founder and president of the Center for Industrial Progress. That's a for-profit organization in San Diego, California. When usually we hear about nonprofits.
It's actually Laguna Beach. We just have a fake address in San Diego,
okay.
So I don't get bombed.
Well, you know what? I don't know why you just said Laguna Beach. Then maybe Orange County. How about that?
No problem.
Nuclear energy. This to me is, you have said we've actually sort of criminalized it. What do you mean by that?
If you look at the trajectory of nuclear in the late 60s and early 70s, this was a great technology that was really taking America and to some extent the world by storm. But most people don't know America has more nuclear reactors than anywhere else in the world. France has more proportionally. But we've had the most in absolute terms. And what you see starting in that period is the cost goes up something like 10 times. So this should be very odd because when you have a new technology and all the raw materials aren't changing that much in price, you would expect the cost to go down, right? As you become more efficient. I mean, you look at what happens with microprocessors and, any kind of consumer electronics, these small scale things, they go down in price, and nuclear has gone up in price. This should be just an obsession, by the way, of our politicians. If they want to investigate things, they should be investigating what happened to the price of nuclear, because it's a real catastrophe. And the way I describe it is it's become regulated to the point of virtual criminalization, which just means that everything you want to do with nuclear is incredibly hard. And so, the main thing is delays. If you think about, Michele, like, hey, I've got a nuclear project for you to invest in. Like, do you want to invest $50,000 in this nuclear project? Well, a huge amount of that depends on how long it takes the project to get completed. Right. And so what happens is you've gone from a 4-year timetable to a 16-year timetable and a timetable in which the thing can be canceled. There have been many plants that have just gotten canceled.
Why do they get canceled?
Well, it can be two things. One is there can just be so many cost overruns they decide to withdraw, but also it can be that they don't. You have an anti-nuclear person. I believe this happened with Mario Cuomo in New York. I think they had invested something like $5 billion. I'd have to get the exact numbers, but yeah, they can just be canceled because there's a big anti-nuclear movement. And the anti-nuclear movement is the root of the criminalization. You have all these organizations like the Union of Concerned Scientists, Greenpeace, Sierra Club. They're against nuclear as such. And so they do everything they can to sue these plants, to claim false dangers. And that's a big aspect of the delay as well as the lawsuit. So it's these anti-nuclear groups that, by the way, claim to care about clean energy and lowering CO2 that are the biggest enemy.
Well, this is what's so fascinating to me. And I remember Michael Schellenberger, who grew up again in California, environmentalist, green guy, and had this epiphany about nuclear, that this is the cleanest, safest, but everyone thinks of Chernobyl. Everyone thinks of 3 Mile Island, the disasters that happen, and they, God forbid, an accident happen again. How comfortable or confident are you that what happened in the past can be avoided?
Well, if you look at what happened in the past, so Chernobyl is a unique case because it's the only one where people have actually been killed by radiation. And what the reactor used in Chernobyl was sort of like a half nuclear plant, half weapon that was never considered in the free part of the world and would never be allowed. So you can just think of it as a totally different technology.
So that's kind of a one-off then in a way.
It's a one-off, but also the death count is not, like, even if you factor that in, the death count from nuclear is far, far lower than any other technology. So no form of energy is perfectly safe, but nuclear is by far the safest. And the basic reason is because it cannot explode. The basic reason, at least in terms of neighbors, in terms of producing it, it's because it's very compact. So you don't have to do as much mining as you do for coal or for the elements in solar panels and wind turbines. But yeah, the basic thing is nuclear doesn't explode. What can happen under very, very rare circumstances is it can melt down, but you have tons of time to deal with it. If a hydroelectric dam breaks, you have no time. That can wipe out 100,000 people. Like fossil fuel-based plants can catch fire. Even wind turbines can catch fire. Solar panels can catch fire. It's totally different than a nuclear plant. So the way people put it is, this is the way I put it. People will say to me, hey, Alex, like, okay, you advocate nuclear. You're such a big advocate of nuclear, but you would never live near a nuclear power plant. And I say I would live next to one because it's far safer than the thing I live next to now, which is a street.
Well, that puts it pretty bluntly and pretty plainly, for sure. Yeah, I think that you raise a great point in the fact that the prices to produce nuclear have gone up, that it's become more costly, and maybe I think that is something worth looking into, because again, the source of energy, it could answer so many issues for people, but like so many problems in Washington, I'm not sure people really want solutions. I think they like to have these things to fight over and fundraise against. I mean,
I think some do.
I think some do. You're right. Not all. And I'm as guilty as anyone of painting with a broad brush, and I should not do that. But if we're really going to be so phobic of climate change, we really ought to look at all solutions. You mentioned machines prior, and how they've advanced culture and society, and we're looking now at gas stove bans. And I can remember when President Obama was in office, he would talk about, hey, look, you just take your jacket off, roll up your sleeves. You don't need an air conditioner. Well, tell that to my 92-year-old mom who lives in Southern California, that she should not have air conditioning when it's extremely hot. It's this idea that these improvements in life, whether it's a gas stove or a refrigerator, what was it, John Kerry, or was it Biden who said that refrigerators are bad? And, now we have this sort of attack on things that make life really good for people. Where is this all coming from, that climate religion?
Well, the example of your mom, I think, is really telling, because it's the broader narrative, particularly when it gets hot. When it gets hot, or when we have wildfires, the narrative is, oh, let's just stop using fossil fuels. That's the solution. But wait a second. No. If we stop using fossil fuels, it's not going to get measurably cooler anytime soon. And your mom is just not going to have air conditioning, right? So it's a mortal threat to her. But this is the broader thing. This applies to everyone in the world, right? Without fossil fuels, or a comparably cost-effective source of energy, there are 3 billion people today who use less electricity than a typical American refrigerator. They're not going to get it. So the biggest problem people have is lack of energy, not the specific climate they live in. In America, we've proven you can have every climate imaginable and thrive in it if you have sufficient wealth, especially energy. But if you don't, you can't deal with any climate. So what it really shows, I think, is that the focus on the climate religion, as you call it, I think it's a good term, their focus on concern for human beings being harmed by climate is phony. Because notice, they only care about that when it advances their agenda of opposing fossil fuels. But they never care about, hey, all the people who are dying of floods that could be prevented if we had good infrastructure that we built up using fossil fuels, or the people who die of heat that could be saved with air conditioning. They certainly don't care about the far greater number of people who die of cold than of heat, who need fossil fuels to keep warm. Even that's extended to Europe now, which has regressed into primitivism because of these so-called green policies. So my overall analysis in Fossil Future, specifically chapter 3, is that the climate movement, its goal is not advancing human flourishing on Earth, including keeping us safe from climate, because then they would be obsessed with energy. Their goal is eliminating our impact on Earth, specifically on climate. They believe that the Earth and climate are perfect without us, and that any impact we have is evil and should be minimized or eliminated. And I think it's that religion that is guiding the world. You can think of it as their commandment is, thou shalt not impact climate, or thou shalt not impact Earth. And the whole focus, I think this will clarify a lot for people, is just getting rid of impact. Our whole obsession with the society is, how do we stop impacting climate? It's not how do we empower the world. It's not how do we make 8 billion people flourish. It's how do we stop impacting climate? And that is an anti-human goal. Your whole focus is, how do we stop doing something, versus how do we make life good? And it's the wrong philosophy that's causing this.
I would love to end on that note, but I have to ask you this before we go. How you've kind of got a movement here that you seem to be at the vanguard of, which is this: I want people to flourish. I want human flourishing worldwide, and that's going to require fossil fuels. And then there's this climate agenda on the other side. How badly is your side losing, or are you gaining ground, if I could put it in that kind of, terminology?
Well, I think we're definitely gaining ground. I mean, the other side is unfortunately they're gaining ground in different ways as well. But I think like when I started this, I got into this 16 years ago now. I started researching this and I started forming my views pretty early on. And even when I wrote the book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels in 2014, I was pretty much a voice in the wilderness. I mean, almost nobody was saying this. Nobody from the industry, almost, nobody else. I mean, even Michael Schellenberger, as a friend of mine, is a great example. Like he wasn't really pro fossil fuels back in 2014. He was pro nuclear, so we were aligned on that. But he was quite hostile toward fossil fuels, and he really changed his views on that, including climate catastrophism. I think there are other people who have emerged, like Bjorn Lomborg, Steve Koonin, Mark Mills, and they've, not to say I've influenced all of them, but it's been really cool to see what I call the rise of energy humanism, which is we think of energy from this human flourishing perspective versus this hostility toward all human impact perspectives. I think that's been really cool to see. And for me, what I think what makes me optimistic is one is I've been able to create the resources that I wish I had at the beginning. Like at the beginning, I didn't know how to argue any of this. I didn't know how to debate people. I've debated a lot of people. I learned a lot. But now what I've created is not only Fossil Future, which is kind of the comprehensive guide. There's a website I created called energytalkingpoints.com, which is totally free. You can go there. You can search any issue you can imagine, and it gives a perfect talking point, in my view, with references. And so what this is doing is this is arming anyone who's interested in this issue. You can be a citizen. You can be a politician. A lot of politicians use it, and you can have the best arguments. You can be at a dinner table. And what they've now started doing, one person on their own made Chat ETP, so Chat Energy Talking Points, where they just took my talking points and made a chat app like OpenAI's. I actually have one of my own that I've been developing, but it just shows the resources that are available now are so much better. And if we have free, really good resources, these can scale. The other thing is people are waking up because of the global energy crisis. People like the idea of green energy policies in theory, opposing fossil fuels in theory. But when you see Europe at the mercy of Russia because of fossil fuels, you see Americans paying higher prices. People, and you see, I mean, if you look at the third world, it's much, much worse in terms of them not being able to afford power because they're being outbid by Europe and by us. People are really waking up to an energy crisis is real. The climate crisis is at best a huge exaggeration. And I think that we have this moment to challenge the narrative. And I've tried to create the resources to help people challenge the narrative. So it's exciting to see that work. And even the politicians have improved a lot. I work with a lot of them now. And I think Energy Talking Points in this messaging has helped a lot.
I've gained a lot just in this short conversation. I'm going to continue to read your stuff, and I discovered the Talking Points website earlier and have enjoyed that as well. And I highly recommend that. We will direct people to it and hopefully have you back again, Alex Epstein. What a pleasure to talk to you. I admire your courage to stand on what is something you really believe. And in the face of many who'd like to just bring you down, this is a moment in America for more and more people, no matter what their views are, to stand on courage and their beliefs and values.
Well, it's very exciting for me because I've heard you since I was a kid on the sidelines.
I'm ancient,
and
yep.
And I just have to say one experience I've had during this interview is because I just say, oh, wow, this is what a real broadcaster is like, because you're just so smooth with the transitions and adapting to it. It reminds me of Bob Costas. And so it's like, oh, yeah, there's all of us who do our own little podcast, but this is a real person. So that's been
my
very
goodness.
fun
That is such flattery to be compared with my friend Bob Costas. Wow, that's something. Alex, thank you so much. Again, the book Fossil Future, Why Global Human Flourishing requires more oil, coal, and natural gas, not less. He's also written The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. Fossil fuels improve the planet. There it is, Fossil Future. Get your copy. And Alex, thanks. We'll do it again. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Sideline Sanity. And, find your moral compass and be brave about it and do good with it. Thanks for listening.